Hello, this is Charles from Next Level Purchasing. I was just at a client's office today giving a presentation, and I thought this would be a good opportunity to do a new vlog to share some of the ideas that we kicked around during my presentation. Now, as part of the presentation, I was asked to speak on the history of purchasing. Now, that topic makes me a little apprehensive when people ask me to speak about it, because at any given point in time, not all companies will be at the same place in their purchasing evolution. At any given point in time, there are going to be leaders, those companies that are a decade or two ahead of where everyone else is in their purchasing. Then there's going to be the critical mass, where most companies are with their purchasing at that point in time. And then, of course, there's going to be the laggards, those companies that would be a decade or maybe even more behind where everyone else is in their purchasing. So with those caveats, I did agree to kind of share my impressions on the history of purchasing. First, we took a look back at purchasing 2 or 3 decades ago. And back in those days, if you asked the questions, why do we need a purchasing department? The answer would often be for the sake of control. You see, how do we know that business units are buying things for the company rather than for their own personal gain? How do we know that we're paying a supplier the right price? How do we know that a supplier isn't billing us multiple times for a product or service we only purchased once? So in that regard, purchasing processes and systems were set up for the sake of control, for making sure that no fraud was happening either internally or externally with suppliers. Now in the 1990s, purchasing's value started to become more and more apparent. Companies began to realize that by having their purchasers negotiate or ask for discounts on the goods or services they bought, they were actually able to reduce prices and as a result improve the profitability of the company. So cost savings became the term of the day. Control, of course, was still important, but cost savings really became the flag that was waved by purchasing departments. And that became more and more of a big deal, and in the mid-90s and late 90s we saw strategic sourcing become increasingly adopted, where companies were looking to consolidate their enterprise-wide spend, sign contracts with one supplier or a select set of suppliers, and engage in a long-term deal that produced significant cost savings. So that's really the decade that purchasing began to show its value. And then as we moved into the current decade, the 2000s if you will, companies began to realize that a myopic focus on price wasn't necessarily healthy. You could get a low price and claim cost savings, but often the lowest price wasn't combined with acceptable on-time delivery or acceptable quality or acceptable service levels. And the costs of poor performance became quantifiable and quantified. And more companies began using total cost of ownership methods in their decision making and began to manage supplier performance, where they would take performance measures regarding suppliers' delivery, quality, service, and then meet with those suppliers on a regular basis for the purpose of improving supplier performance and therefore improving total cost. So as we get ready to move into the next decade, one may ask, well, have we matured? Have we reached the highest level that purchasing can really reach? I mean, after all, people are taking a pretty holistic view of purchasing today, right? Well, my answer to that is that we have not. And in the 2010s, we are going to see a continued evolution of purchasing. And so, what do we base any of those types of predictions on? Well, as I mentioned, there are leaders in every decade, and a lot of times you can just look to the leaders in a certain decade and know what's going to be adopted by the critical mass in the next decade. So I see purchasing in the 2010s being a little bit different than today. I think companies will realize that purchasing is their interface with much of the outside world. You see, within a company you may have hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of employees who represent the potential for ideas to help that company succeed and grow. But then when you look at that company's supply base, you realize that there are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of other individuals out there among both current and prospective suppliers that can bring ideas into the company for innovation and improvement. And I see purchasing as being the funnel through which those ideas travel, particularly the best ideas, travel into the organization and get implemented so that the company can innovate and can get itself a more competitive edge in the marketplace. So that's my view on the history of purchasing and the near-term future of purchasing. So I'll wrap up this vlog at this time. This is Charles Dominick with Next Level Purchasing, thanking you for tuning in.